Welcome back to Close Up. Each week seems to bring another announcement of a new presidential candidate, or in some weeks, several. And some more twists and turns as this primary season really gets underway in earnest. So to get a sense of the state of the race at this point, Professor of Politics at St. Anselm College, Chris Gualtieri joins us this morning. So Professor, we got to talk about the state of the race because it seems like we keep getting a growing and growing field. We'll talk about both sides to make things easy. So let's start with the Democrats. Are we done seeing any more Democratic primary challengers, do you believe? Like, is this the field, so to speak?
I think that's right. I think, you've got Williamson and Kennedy, and they are running sort of very much outsider candidacies. What I don't think we're likely to see is somebody who currently holds office or somebody who has aspirations for holding other office running for president against Biden. There was some chatter from Democrats that maybe he was too old, maybe he wasn't getting enough done this time last year. But I think since the 2022 election, most Democrats nationwide have decided, you know what, we're going to get behind Biden for another term.
And give us the sense, is that typical for the incumbent, for the party to basically say, look, we're sticking with our horse? Yeah,
it's very, very unusual. There have been primary challenges before. Bill Weld against Donald Trump in 2020, Pat Buchanan against George Bush in 1992. But those didn't really have a ton of impact on those races. I think they were ways for candidates to express their displeasure with the incumbent, maybe boost their political profile. But in the end, these sorts of challenges usually don't amount to a whole lot.
So I do want to talk about the challengers, or a couple of them. So RFK Jr. currently polling in the high teens at this point. The Biden camp has told the Wall Street Journal they don't view him as a threat, but they've described some heartburn in their words, in terms of how this is maybe affecting the campaign, especially in the early states of, say, Iowa and here in New Hampshire. How does the Biden team interact with Kennedy, or do they just try to avoid the campaign altogether?
I think they do try to avoid that campaign altogether. You've heard lots of calls from Kennedy for, oh, let's have a debate between me and the president. But if I'm Biden, the last thing I want to do is step on a stage with Kennedy and elevate him and basically say that his candidacy is, legitimate like anybody else's is. I think the more they ignore him, the harder it becomes for Kennedy to be a viable challenger.
And there's also been talk that I think it was Bret Stephens in the New York Times had a piece about Kennedy this week, saying that he could play the role of essentially telling Biden it may be time to step aside, kind of like McCarthy to LBJ, to make way for somebody else like a Newsom or some other candidate. Do you see that happening in any scenario here in 2023?
Yeah, I think it's very, very unlikely. When you go back and look at 1968, you had a very divided country, you had a very divided Democratic Party, you had a very unpopular Lyndon Johnson who was unpopular within his own party. I think that was a fundamentally different dynamic than the one you have where most Democrats like Joe Biden. They like the job he's doing. There are concerns about his age, but as he says, it's not between me and the Almighty, it's between me and the other candidate. So I think from most Democrats' perspective, the Kennedy campaign is sort of an insurgency in search of a rationale. It's more about, I think, Kennedy boosting himself and boosting his particular unique set of viewpoints than it is about the expectation that he will become president of the United States.
And so precluding any primary challenge, which doesn't seem likely in a major way, the president then looks forward to the election, the full cycle coming up in November. How does Hunter Biden play into this? The deal this week about the plea deal, it calls for the president's son to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of failing to pay taxes. Hunter Biden also must commit to court-imposed conditions that spare him any full prosecution on a felony gun charge, likely avoid any prison time. How does this play in the campaign, and what role does this have when it comes to the election?
Well, I think, having the president's son plead guilty to federal charges is never something a White House wants to see happen. But I think what we're likely to see from the president and from the people around him moving forward is simply saying Hunter Biden made some mistakes, he's atoned for them, he's pleaded guilty, et cetera, and this is in the past. Biden, I think, spoke pretty movingly back in 2020 during one of the debates about how, look, this is my son, he's had problems, but I love him and I'm proud of him. I think in that regards, that's something a lot of Americans can relate to. What they want to avoid is the impression that he got special treatment because he's the president's son, or that, he should have been charged with other things, but wasn't, again, because of who his father is. So I think they're going to try to, navigate that pretty gently.
Then again, give us the context here. Is the notion of a president's child, whether, actually young or of adult age, being an election issue, is that unusual?
I mean, presidential families have cropped up here and there over the years. Think back to Billy Carter back in the 1970s, or President Bush's son Neil with the savings and loan scandal back in the late 80s, early 90s, President Clinton's brother Roger with his various drug problems and that sort of thing. It's not that unusual for presidential families to have somebody who causes some headaches, but I think most folks make a distinction between a relative and the person on the ballot.
Got it. And on the GOP side, the field getting bigger yet again. We just heard Will Hurd will be joining the campaign field. Is this 2016 all over again for the Republicans?
It certainly looks a lot like that. I think what we're seeing is a lot of Republicans are looking at this race, looking at Donald Trump's legal woes and thinking maybe there's an opening here. They're looking at Ron DeSantis and the launch of his campaign and thinking, maybe he's not the Trump slayer everybody thought he might be when he started talking about running for president. So I think, there's a lot of folks in the party who think, I want to run for president. I might be able to win, so why not throw my hat in the ring and see what happens?
At this point, though, there can't be enough lanes for all of them, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, they're really running to try to see if they can catch fire, if they can, be the one who has a good debate moment or has a great moment with a voter that goes viral or something else that launches them into the top tier of candidates. But those things are, really tough to come by.
And so the next question becomes, when do people start deciding to get out of this race? I know it's strange to talk about it because people are just getting in, but it will be a pretty quick winnowing field. Do you imagine?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, it seems kind of odd to think of it in those terms this early, but the primary is only 6 or 7 months away.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're a candidate and you're not able to really get any sort of traction with primary voters, say over this summer, I think that's a point at which a lot of candidates might start wanting to think about whether or not their campaign is viable. And I think they're going to be helped by that by folks like Chris Sununu, who, when he announced he was not running for president, also said, but I do want to make sure that we nominate somebody who's not Trump. And I will be, talking to candidates whose campaigns seem to not be going anywhere about trying to get out sooner rather than later, so you don't have a situation like 2016 where you had a just very large field of candidates as late as the primaries in places like South Carolina and Florida.
And you mentioned end of the summer. That's when that first debate happens. Do you think that'll be a critical moment for a lot of these lesser-known candidates?
I think it will, but I think that's, those debates are a double-edged sword. If you think back to 2020 and how crowded those debate stages were, if you were a candidate who wasn't very well known already, if you weren't Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, you were stuck on the far ends of the stage, and you were lucky to get one question and one response. So I think, for a candidate who's banking it all on a big debate moment, you've got to be very lucky to make that happen.
And how are we doing here in New Hampshire so far with the First the Nation primary? How does this year compare at this point to what we've seen previous years when it comes to candidates coming through, announcements happening, events happening? What are you seeing on the ground?
It seems like this is a bit of a slower year than it has been in the past. I think even though there are so many candidates, they haven't spent a ton of time here. And the ones who have so far have been these, as you put it, lesser-known candidates, folks like Asa Hutchinson and Will Hurd, who don't have a really strong national profile. And these are the candidates who can benefit the most from talking to and meeting as many voters as possible.
So what do you think that's about, that we're not seeing as many this time around this cycle?
Well, I think you have a front runner, Donald Trump, who has been indicted twice so far this year, likely to be indicted again in Georgia by the end of the summer. I think that is sort of cramping his campaign style a bit. Plus, he's never been somebody who's done a ton of retail face-to-face events. He hasn't been somebody who's gone to farmers markets or held a lot of town hall meetings. He holds rallies. That's what he does. And he gives big speeches,
right,
and that's what he does. I think with DeSantis, you've got somebody who has a day job as governor of Florida, so that makes it tough to come up to New Hampshire. Whereas with somebody like Hutchinson, somebody like Will Hurd, somebody like Chris Christie, these folks who don't currently hold office, don't have other responsibilities, they can basically devote all of their time to running for president.
All right, we will keep watching to see who comes up here.
We will.
Professor Gualtieri, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure.